Introducing TiE Singapore Huddle Sessions.
Hi everyone, my name is Sidhi Dhir and I serve as the Executive Director for TiE Singapore. In the face of the current COVID-19 situation, we started this 5 sessions Huddle Series earlier this month to discuss and share perspectives from the relevant folks involved in supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Today is our last session in this series. Thank you for an overwhelming response and support that you have shown us week after week. The topic for this week is an international perspective on the post-COVID-19 world. We discuss topics ranging from the various trends expected in the tech innovation space and with significant and fundamental impact on the business all over across various regions, what would a new normal look like? Moderating this discussion would be Puneet Pushkarna. Puneet is the general partner of Solmark, a private equity fund formed by a group of tech entrepreneurs. He is the chairman of Servion and Innovio. He is also the emeritus chairman of TiE Singapore and sits on the global board of trustees for TiE Global. Before I hand it over to Puneet to introduce the speakers and kickstart the discussion, few housekeeping rules. To ask your questions, please use the Q&A button either located at the top or bottom of your screen. This recording would be shared with all post the session. If you want to have all the views of the speakers, you could choose from the gallery or the speaker view. The option would be possible. You could use that option positioned on the right top corner of your screen. And lastly, we are all getting accustomed to the new normal of working from home. There is a possibility that there might be connectivity issues and some unwanted background music. So please bear with us if such a thing happens. Over to you, Puneet.
Thank you, Sidhi. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Puneet Pushkarna, and I'm very excited today to have two very esteemed panelists from across the globe. I have Ken Mandel, who is the Regional Managing Director for Grab Ads and Brand Insights at Grab. And as you can see, he's leaving no doubts by wearing a bright green T-shirt from Grab. He's got about 25 years of building and advising leading marketing and technology companies in Asia Pacific. He's had leadership roles with WPP, Yahoo, Buddy Media, Salesforce, Publicis, and a whole lot of other companies. He currently is the Regional Managing Director for Grab Ads and Brand Insights. And he's a big supporter, I must say, for the Asian digital industry and has held numerous industry association chairmanships, including the chairman of the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the Mobile Marketing Association, the Digital Marketing Alliance, and many more. Ken's current role at Grab is an eclectic accumulation of almost everything that he has done over this pioneering career. And so welcome. Good to have you here, Ken.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I also have Gadi. Gadi is a professor of technology. He's based in Tel Aviv. Gadi has a very long experience of studying, mentoring, and teaching high-tech entrepreneurship, as well as international business strategies, in tech-intensive companies across the world, particularly where he's had pioneering roles in Israel and the ecosystem that Israel's been involved with. He's also been a member of the India-Israeli Strategic Dialogue Forum from 2008 onwards, and he's recognized as a very good advisor to the city of Nanjing on high-tech industrial development. Gadi does have a strong connection to India besides the India-Israeli Strategic Dialogue that he's been engaged on as a visiting professor to IIM Bangalore, and also has been associated with the Center for Research in Technology and Innovation at Kellogg School of Management in the US. So Gadi, welcome, and good to have both of you.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the gracious introduction. I always hope my mother would hear it at once, but she's away.
So Gadi, to get us going, maybe I can start with you first. What is your perspective? Israel's always been at the leading edge. You guys have always, been at the bleeding edge, not even at the leading edge, but at the bleeding edge. And as we're negotiating this COVID world, really would like to hear from you what the post-COVID world, in your opinion, is going to look like. So Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, I'll do it shortly, and we may expand later, and Ken will join in and refute and disagree. I hope it'll be blood on the screen. That makes panels very interesting. So let me start with the rejecting the title. Okay, I think what we were, I mean, and I'm assuming that the most of us attending this session are, hardworking entrepreneurs looking at opportunities and so on. I think it's inappropriate to look at the post-COVID-19. It's because we're now at COVID-19.0, and we expect in the fall to have COVID-19.1, and then eventually we'll have COVID-20. And, we live with coronaviruses, about 7 or 8 of them, and 3 or 4 are with us for a long time. And eventually the SARS-CoV-2 will be part of our life. So that's sort of one comment. So if we're looking at the, and I'll argue why the immediate view should be about a year to a year and a half. And, for cash-strapped entrepreneurs, a year and a half is a very long time. And that has to be taken into account. Without belaboring too much on the wall view, I'd like to suggest a framework for the discussion, and that's the notion of a domino falling, okay? The first domino was a sort of medical domino, a medical crisis. That created, when that fell, it sort of hit a healthcare crisis, and we were very worried about, the capacity of the healthcare system, and the attempt was to flatten the curve. Okay, then one way to flatten the curve was to sort of use the hammer and to have full closure, which I believe most of us have experienced, and that created the next crisis, which is the economic crisis, both on the macro level and the micro, at the business level, okay? The worry was that, the economic crisis would lead into another domino falling, which is the financial one. And most government reacted to that, and this seems to be, under control for large sense. So, I mean, now, so when we define the post, okay, it will not be over unless we lift each of the domino stones, okay, and we resolve the medical crisis. And the medical crisis, everyone says, even though a lot of, news, and you might have heard that, an Israeli research center has found an effective antibody yesterday. It was a sort of announcement and so on. Between discovery and use, there's a year. Okay, so we all have to sort of realize, and I think this is lesson number 1 to everyone in business, is that this is not going to be over, in June. Okay, the crisis, or parts of the crisis, will sort of linger for a long time, probably a year, hopefully not a year and a half, but that's the sort of the pace of it. That is sort of the framework. Now, if you read into that, I don't know if we want to stop here and then relate to global issues and technology issues along this framework, or you want sort of to let Ken react to that. Puneet.
Yeah, let me come back to that, but I'd love to get a repartee from Ken as to, I love the domino theory of how you laid it out to say medical, healthcare, economic, and financial. So I'd love to get Ken's bearing on that, and I'll come back to the technology and the other issues that there.
Yeah.
Ken?
Okay, no, thanks. I mean, I think unfortunately, Gadi, there's no blood on this one. Maybe there'll be blood on the next refute, but I tend to agree. There's right now there's this divergence between Main Street and Wall Street, which is really scary for me. When I see Wall Street go like this, and you see job, unemployment rates, which are unprecedented, that's always a good indicator that something is amiss. And I think that, obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, as you said, Puneet, it's a long time to wait, or sorry, maybe it was Gadi who said that. And you really have to start thinking about how you're going to manage the situation. But I also think if you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking of starting a business, you couldn't find a better time, actually. To start a business in a recession is actually counterintuitively not a bad idea. It's actually a good idea. But for those who are already in business, it's a very scary time. And I think, when people are looking for opportunities, you have to, I know there was a question about innovation, but you can't just look for innovation at this time. You have to look at what are the attitudinal changes that are happening in society, right? Innovation comes perhaps, later in that process. But first, it's much more like a Maslow hierarchy of needs for people. And in a new normal, their needs will change. Their attitudes will change. Just like, World War II, women went into the workforce. That didn't reverse. That stayed. During 9/11, we now think it's normal to go through airport security the way we do. Which is ridiculous, especially if you're traveling in the States. You really feel like a prisoner. And SARS, we saw e-commerce boom mostly in China, and that's why China is ahead of the rest of the world today in e-commerce. It's one of the reasons, not the only reason. So I think when you're sitting there as an entrepreneur, you have to look at what are the attitudinal shifts that are going to change, but which ones are going to retreat back to normal, but which ones are also going to stick. And that's where I think there's opportunity.
So thanks, Ken. So in essence, I do. So what you're saying is it's going to be, not to paraphrase this thing, but I've heard the term a lot of times about the new normal, right, so to speak. And you're saying that in the new normal, there is, in fact, as we're approaching that new normal or we're getting there is, in fact, an opportunity to start new businesses in there. So, Gadi, my point to both of you actually is that therefore, in the new normal, what kind of businesses do you think are there opportunities to go after?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I will take the sort of righteous posture to argue that intellectually, we don't know what the new normal will be in the short term. Okay. So I tend to agree with Ken that, needs are, fundamental needs are not going to change. Okay. People need to eat. People will seek health. People will eventually look for, Ken mentioned the Maslow. People will, there are invariant needs that will dominate the long term. In the short term, yes. And I'll sort of relate to what Ken said, the attitudinal changes. Okay. And then, so that has to be taken into account. And again, when you're looking at the sort of the business side, and I'll answer your question more directly in a second, is that, of all, let me rephrase it, economic crisis, an epidemic crisis have a V-shaped recovery, okay? Because with all due respect to the COVID-19, no factory was destroyed, no, the production means have been sort of washed away by the tsunami and so on, okay? And in parentheses, I'll relate to Ken because I think the, two-sided platforms, that's an interesting case because your demand and supply is messed up. But in the real world, supply chains have been restored. Many of them never really stopped. Even in Israel, about 80% of the manufacturing, enterprises were active to lower extent, but then now pretty much fully recovered, okay? The problem is demand. And that's where the attitude is kicking in. And that's where people will probably, so if we can sort of speculate on the new normal, and I must say that I don't like that too much. Obviously, physical distancing will be with us for a long time. Working from home, as Ken said, people discover that can you work from home, and it's easier than what you thought. Invented necessity is a mother of invention, and ultimately discretionary expenses will be controlled, and that's again because of attitude and because of the chain effect of recovery. Okay, not all sectors will recover at the same time. Okay. If eventually, I'll let Ken sort of spill some blood on the screen, but otherwise we can talk about, technology opportunities and global opportunities. But that's, I don't know how, and I'm not taking.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
So, I mean, Ken, I see that Gadi is refraining from defining the new normal, but one of the things that indisputably has come out as a secular trend that we're seeing is that the pandemic has clearly accelerated a lot of digital trends. And, Grab sits in the middle of all of that. And so just be curious from your vantage point, what are you seeing in the emerging world? So I'm refraining to say the new world, but I'm saying in the emerging world, if I may be allowed that.
Yep.
Sure. Yeah, we are in a unique position, and we also have a great responsibility in this emerging world, as you call it. We are the food supply for many people right now, which is why we're an essential service in some countries. And I wish more would recognize us as that, because not everybody is as lucky as me and has a wonderful wife who makes great food. And for some people, you need to get your food somewhere. And online food delivery is obviously an important, if not essential, service right now. But Gadi's right. From a supply chain point of view, our transport business is certainly hurting because people are staying at home. But we've been able to pivot and move those drivers over to food, where we didn't have enough people to do delivery. So using our 4-wheel fleet, where normally we'd use a 2-wheel fleet. But we're definitely seeing a huge adoption of just, digital, consumption. And this is not just from a Grab point of view. This is, I'm sure if you talk to our friends, on other online platforms, they're seeing, this nesting kind of community. People are at home and they're consuming content like crazy. And this is where I believe, you have to ask yourself, will this stick or will this not? If I look at the other ad platforms out there, they probably never had a situation where they had so many people on their platform, but advertising expenditure was down, right? That will recover. So that will not stick. In fact, we've always seen that in every recession, digital advertising comes back so much faster than every other form because it's less permanent. You can turn it on and off. And so, I don't think anyone is too concerned about that. Where there's bigger concerns, of course, is, we were looking at travel, right? This is not the right time to be looking at travel. We quickly pivoted to drive up Grab Mart. So Grab Mart is our direct-to-consumer service where you can get items delivered to you, not food, but convenience items, fast-moving consumer goods, ready-to-eat meals. So Grab Mart we've launched in all our markets pretty much very quickly because we know that people are looking for these items and they are not able to go out and get them. So that was I think this is a time where you have very little opportunity to think about what's next. You have to be ready to move. You unfortunately need to have these black swan playbooks probably going forward because whoever would make a black swan playbook, it doesn't, when that comes out of my mouth, it doesn't even sound right. But it's we now know that anything can happen, and we should be planning for it. Whether your business is one person, two people, a small startup, or a large mega company.
I agree. Puneet, if I'm allowed to be Israeli and jump in without, this sort of not respecting your moderation.
Who can stop you? Go ahead, please.
No, the point is from business perspective, the question right now is resilience and not necessarily efficiency. And then companies that are sort of larger and have accumulated some fat that they consume right now will have the luxury to think, and I completely agree with Ken. So in that sense, I apologize to the attendees. There'll be less disagreement. We'll have to find something to fight over. eventually. But because, if you had some, I saw recently that, small businesses in the United States on average have a sort of a cash reserve for 2 weeks. That requires a lot of agility. Okay, so the resilience indicator is alarming, but it requires a lot of rethinking in 2 weeks. So if you had a fleet of cars and then you repurpose them to for deliveries of goods rather than people, that's a shift that is, marginal to some extent, significant in other one, but I hope you had the funds to wait it out. New normal, that's a long question. Right now, I think and again, I'm sort of looking at entrepreneurship. It is so much short term. I agree that if you have the luxury to think ahead and you have something very inexpensive idea sort of for implementation, it might be a very good time to try it out. And I refer to what what was said here last week on capital access. Obviously, certain areas are very attractive right now for VC and non-VC funding, and we can sort of quickly relate to that if we get to.
Sure. No, I agree. I think the Darwinian theory is being rewritten to the sense that not the survival of the fittest, but the survival of the quickest. And to your point about resilience, I think definitely resilience is replacing efficiency as the priority number one. So, and to that extent, then the question is that if this is happening so rapidly, we don't have the time. And again, I think many of the folks here are looking at, so what is the behavioral change that has to come? So we talked about, how food's going to change, how transport is changing, how this whole content consumption, Ken, you talked about that's happening. My question is really, who will then emerge intact from this pandemic, purgatory, and who will not? So what is your sense? Let's focus on who will, and how do we, and the question and the ancillary question is, and how do we get there? And so who are the businesses? Because many businesses are not necessarily in that space today. So your advice to the startup community to say, if you're not in that business today, what should you do to pivot there? So Ken, maybe can I go with you?
Yeah, can you hear me? I just switched to these headphones because someone commented they couldn't hear me well.
Sure, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. There's the obvious players, right? And when you look at, the, S&P 500, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, they make up like a huge part of that. And so anybody who's already, a strong online player, where, I often think of this like X at home. Whatever you are that works at home is only going to benefit. But I think there's others, right? I think there's, if you start thinking downstream, if working at home becomes something we do more often, I'm not saying it becomes a new normal, because I think offices will remain. But I would question whether even myself, I need to be in the office as many times of the day, a week that I'm there. I'm on the road a lot as well. And I don't feel that productivity has actually decreased, as a lot of us we were concerned. I mean, we were concerned that our productivity would go down. If anything, our teams are working harder than ever. And to the point where they have to schedule in breaks because we just get on Zoom calls and go from morning to night. And I tell my team now, hey, schedule in some time just to, eat. And that's crazy. So from that point of view, I think you're going to have people really thinking along the lines of, if I'm going to work from home, I don't have a proper home office. I don't have a proper setup. I need a better light. I want to get a better microphone. I want to do some painting. I want to do some renovation. So you're going to see all sorts of weird things like, printers, desks, renovations. There'll be downstream benefits to this, and in terms of home improvements. Obviously, we talked about delivery services. Streaming is quite obvious, but I think there's other things that are less intuitive. Collaboration platforms. Zoom is a great platform, but it's not a great collaboration platform. working together. So is that going to mean something like Slack, or is Slack too difficult, or Microsoft Teams? There's a lot of opportunity for innovation on top of these platforms. So if I was Zoom, I would open up APIs to let people build on top of me. So I could actually do things where it's a more of a social Zoom, because the only way for me to really chat with friends, even in the same city now, is we have to have a Zoom call. And who wants to get on a Zoom call after doing, I don't know how many during the day? So when I get these invites like, hey, let's have drinks over Zoom. And I'm like, shit, I don't know if I want to get on another Zoom. But if there was a plug-in to Zoom that changed it from my corporate Zoom, like we're doing now, to a more like entertaining Zoom, I don't know what that would be. But these are the opportunities that I think are out there.
Sure.
I'll pause there in terms of the industries that are not going to do as well, because that's also interesting.
No. And Gadi, you have spent a lot of time, with businesses as well, and so Ken gave a good perspective. And I agree that a lot of these B2C businesses where we're going to get to the consumer and enable the consumer, but there's a question here to say, what about the B2B world? What specifically do you see in the B2B world besides collaboration tools that Ken talked about? What else would you say are specifically in the B2B world?
The interesting that you raise it, because I think in the B2B, it will be derivative of it's a B2B2C, okay? And so the needs of the businesses to reach out and regain their customer contact will be item number one, okay? In that sense, I would, again, echoing what Ken has said, is that I think the sort of the overnight crisis has a pendulum effect. I'm looking around Israel and I'm looking around the higher education. No doubt, that we switched overnight from on-site, on-premise to completely offline, and we're able to maintain seemingly sort of a normal routine. But then comes the backlash, okay? Because as Ken said, and we start to see research about, Zoom fatigue, okay? Unlike, if we were all in three, on stage, okay, I would be able to see, you can see that I'm wearing my pajama, pants right now. And there's a lot of other cues and so on. So we have three talking heads, and that's very tiring. And that's why, so what I'm saying or mumbling is that the backlash will come, and people will use this, the shock to sort of re-examine the fundamentals, okay? And the fundamentals are going to stay there. Attitude will change. And so, yes, I accept the fact that I have to be barefoot to cross the security, going back to the 9/11 example that Ken has mentioned. And in that respect, you asked about Israel. Israel, for cultural and historical reasons, has developed sort of a more benign balance between, personal security, personal privacy, and communal needs. So we tend to accept what in other countries would be invasive. We tend to accept it without much of protest. And that has shown up, and remarkably, if you look at the behavior of the curve, if we go to the COVID-19, we haven't flattened it, we crashed the curve, okay? And, politicians take credit for that. I think that's inappropriate, but that's a different story. But it's actually, in spite all the, the ethos, we're fairly obedient when we realize that something needs to be done, and people have adjusted very, very quickly. And we have a young, population, which helps immensely. In that respect. So, and again, new normal. Who knows what new normal will be? You have to be resilient. You have to be attentive, and you have to sort of adjust, make small adjustments, and realize there are new opportunities, and grab them. Can we generalize about them? It's very difficult. It's very difficult, honestly.
Sure. Since we're on the topic of just getting an international perspective on this thing, Grab is present in many of in the region. There are many other countries. Just your perspective as to how is there unevenness in adoption or what's happening. We see a perspective here in Singapore. Gadi's painted us to what's happening in Israel. Would be great to hear from you. What you see in the region and in other parts that we're not perhaps exposed to as much in Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about mostly Southeast Asia, and Singapore is a small population and a fairly well-off country compared to a lot of its neighbors. And so the way that they can approach a crisis might be different than perhaps another country like Indonesia, where the difference of, not going to work for a couple of weeks could be the difference between your family starving, or do you risk getting COVID? And I think for most humans, you will risk getting COVID and go to work. You don't have that luxury to stay at home in some economies. And therefore, the response to the crisis has to be different for different populations and different sizes of populations. Herd immunity is one way to look at it. A lot of people would find that that's similar to that Avengers movie where that guy snapped his finger and 50% of the population is gone. In this case, it fortunately will not be 50%, but even 0.1% is not acceptable. But the flip side of that is, what do you do? Do people starve? Do people get to a situation where they're going to have, be so upset about this that there'll be unrest? You cannot, tolerate that as a country either, to have people protesting in the streets. That could be very disruptive, and people could, be hurt or even worse. So it's very tough out there right now. Some markets we've seen move fast. Some countries have, I think Vietnam has been, very aggressive in their response to COVID. They treated it like a war, which is not surprising because Vietnam has been through so many wars. They're good at, defense, and they're good, and they just mobilized, and it was very impressive to see that. And I think, but every country is unique and has unique challenges. And we are seeing that small, medium-sized businesses are in danger right now. That's why we're trying to help as much as we can. I think roughly we've committed about $40 million US dollars because we want to make sure that our partners survive this. I've seen, Facebook do this, Google, a lot of companies are chipping in. And this is where I think, where governments can't chip in, it's up to corporates to help as well. And I think this is what you're going to see in this phase. A lot of people talk about government getting stronger, and that is probably true. But this is also a great opportunity for corporations and government to work hand in hand together.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Ken, we're running very close to the end of this thing, and there are many questions here, and I'd like to address one quick question to you, and then a quick one to Gadi before we wrap up. And then what we'll do is we'll actually send a lot of these questions back to you folks, so if you can answer that to our audience. But the question I have, Ken, specifically for you is, will the gig economy survive? That's a question from one of our audiences. That do you think the gig economy will survive?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that in a few different ways. I can just say yes and leave it at that, but I don't think that'll be interesting to anybody. But ultimately, if you look at unemployment right now, the gig economy is where a lot of people will seek employment to keep the lights on. And we've seen this in some of our driver centers where we had to really, put in crowd control for social distancing because we have so many people signing up for the platform. Our challenge is how do we make onboarding like, a day, not any longer, because people want to work and they deserve to work and they should be able to work. And I think the gig economy will definitely provide a temporary and in some cases maybe a permanent employment for people who lifestyle it suits. And so I do believe it will survive.
Can I add to that? I mean, the gig economy depends on Ken. Because I mean, No, in the sense that you can only have a gig economy if you have a place to meet. And so somebody has to sort of to preserve demand and preserve, and that's what Ken said about investment.
So that's my question to you, Gadi. That's a good lead into my question to you, and unfortunately it'll have to be my last question. Is that Israel, you have been used to, I mean, the COVID thing, people have said it's like a war, and there hasn't been any other society that has seen so much the ability to live in such a conflicting times, etc. So human beings are averse to change and want social interaction. And the question here is that what do you think this COVID impact is going to be, because we will want social interaction, etc. And so how have you dealt with it, and what do you think going forward this will be?
It's interesting. The answer is that I don't know. What I've seen is that people, like in Italy, and sort of stand on their sort of balconies and sing and so on. And I watch my granddaughters from the second floor. We call it the twins watch out, and they come to play in the backyard, and they're used to that. Grandpa is up there in the sky, and. So we find new ways. Do I miss hugging? Sure. We are a very close society. And I go back to, the 60s when Edward Hall did the ethnographic study about distance in different cultures. Obviously, Sweden is very different from Israel. Okay, we huggers and kisser all the time. I mean, we're a very close society. We'll find a substitute for that. And I agree with Ken. I mean, Zoom hugging is no substitute for real one. And so on. So, we will seek sort of close social distances while we maintain long sort of physical distance. And we're more. I mean, maybe because of the crisis, actually, there was a lot of obedience. Okay, but now it fades away. By the way, I mean, we're impatient with the. Too many rules for a long time and so on, and you can see that this is falling apart. Okay.
I think that's a good point to end at. That in spite of the seismic societal changes that the society has encountered, the one thing that I think we will not get away from is that we as society, as human beings, want the social interaction. We'll find a way to get that. Gentlemen, Gadi, Ken, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. Thank you very much for agreeing to our huddle. Much appreciate that. Sidhi, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Puneet. Thank you, Gadi, Ken, and Puneet. This was a very interesting, and I don't know where the 40 minutes went. I take back this line that Zoom hugging is not a substitute, but we are a resilient crew. Something or the other we would figure out.
Yeah.
The fundamentals won't change, but work would continue as usual. This brings us, folks, to an end to a COVID-19 related session, primarily inviting investors and founders to share their perspectives. We would continue our huddle sessions on a monthly basis from now on, focusing on domain specialists, functional experts, and regional leaders to act as a sounding board and share their perspectives with the founders moving forward. We would be sharing more information soon on mail. Our next session would be on the 20th of May, so stay tuned. Ken, Gadi, and Puneet, thank you once again for this to share your perspective. Thank you.